The House will come to order. Prayer by the chaplain.
Almighty God, Master of the universe, Father in heaven, as this august body gathers today on the 8th day of the month of Iyar, whose Hebrew acronym spells out the names of the holy forefathers and mother, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Rachel, and spells, I, the Lord, am your healer, closely following the holiday of Passover, in springtime when all blossom, the festival of liberation, breaking through all boundaries and limitations, achieving success and growth. As your holy servant, our mentor, Rabbi Menachem Mendel Schneerson, the Lubavitcher Rebbe of blessed sacred memory, extolled the virtue and mission of each and every human being. At the dawn of civilization, as related in the holy biblical book of Genesis and its sacred commentaries, you issued first to Adam and then to Noah the following 7 laws, which came to be known as the 7 Noahide laws. 1, to worship you alone and not to worship idols. 2, never to blaspheme your holy name. 3, not to murder. 4, not to commit adultery or immoral sexual acts. 5, not to steal, lie, deceive, or cheat. 6, not to be cruel to any living creature. And the 7th, the one that the lawmakers here today are fulfilling, that every society establish a government to legislate and enforce just laws which are based in the recognition of you, O God, as the sovereign ruler of all. Please grant them to be dynamically cognizant of your presence and conduct their deliberations accordingly. May they govern our great state of Minnesota, blessed with good health, wisdom, compassion, good cheer, and good fellowship. May they constantly realize that in laboring to bring about proper legislation, they are doing your will, and may humankind's acts of goodness and kindness speedily bring about the era of Mashiach, ushering in peace and prosperity for the whole world. Amen.
The chaplain for today is Rabbi Menachem Mendel Feller from Upper Midwest Marcos Lubavitch House, West St. Paul, Minnesota. Pledge of Allegiance. Please remain standing and recite the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The clerk will take the roll. The clerk will close the roll. A quorum is present. The clerk will read the journal of the preceding day.
Journal of the House, 89th session, 47th day, St. Paul, Minnesota, Saturday, April 25th, 2015.
If there's no objection, further reading of the journal will be dispensed with, and the journal will be approved as corrected by the chief clerk. Hearing no objection, the journal is approved as corrected by the chief clerk. Reports of standing committees and divisions. A copy of this order of business has been placed on each member's desk. If there's no objection, the reports will be adopted. Hearing no objection, the reports are adopted. Second reading of House files.
Second reading, House File number 303.
Second reading. Introduction of bills. The following House files have been offered for introduction today. The chief clerk will report the House files and give them their first reading.
Introduction of first reading of House File 2274.
First reading, House File 2274.
That's it, right?
And then on this, so we're going to do the first report, the Nornes lead everything. So first you got to introduce the bill. And then should I just immediately say there, does it to get the bill in the format the House language? To insert the House language, there is a DE amendment. The clerk will report the amendment immediately before I go to Nornes. Calendar for the day. The first bill on the calendar for today is Senate File 5. The clerk will report the bill.
Senate File number 5, number 1 on the calendar for today, an act relating to higher education.
To get the bill in the format the author would like to insert the House language, there is a DE amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Nornes moves to amend Senate File number 5, the fifth engrossment as follows: delete everything after the enacting clause and insert the following House language of House File number 845, the second engrossment. Yep. Yeah, let him explain it before we vote on it, for sure. Yes. Well, let him talk, explain the amendment, and before we adopt it, we got to vote on it.
I recognize the member from Otter Tail, Representative Nornes, to introduce the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I know you've been waiting for this for a long time, right? Do I need just proceed?
We're just, yes, correct. We're just on the amendment, the DE amendment that will insert the House language. So go ahead and introduce the bill or the amendment.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. Members, first I want to begin by thanking the staff that we've had this year in higher education. Without them, we'd really be in deep, deep trouble. And Stacy and Kaylee and Lauren, and then the other physical staff and other people that answer questions and help us to actually conduct the business. I'd like to thank Representative Pawlowski for being a good lead from the DFL side, and of course all the members of the entire committee, including Vice Chair O'Neill. Chairing the Higher Education Committee has always been a pleasure because it's a very bipartisan group and not a big committee, but we all have one thing in common, and that's students, trying to do the best for our students here in the state of Minnesota. We have that as our goal, and one of the things that we're proud of this session with this bill is that for the first time, and I think anyone's recollection, we're actually making some of the tuition lower for some students, and we're very proud of that part of our bill. The minuscule portion of our bill will benefit 410,000 students. That's 410,000 students at 31 of our campuses and universities. So that has a big impact on our students in this state. We're also getting students ready for a career. I think that's the other goal we have, always and especially this session. And improving student safety is also very important. I'd like to just quickly go through the financial part of our bill here, if you bear with me. I should add one other thing. I've been told that the Twins play tonight at 7:10. And I'm going to make a pledge that you can get there. With your cooperation, that is. So, otherwise, we'll send it to you by email. This bill appropriates $56,798,000 above the higher education base. Combine that with another $53 million in reallocation from the state grant program, and we wind up with a total of $109,798,000 available. Of that, we're using $105 million for the MnSCU 2-year college tuition freeze in the year 2016, and a 1% reduction in tuition for the second year. The remaining funds will be used to fund other programs that totals $4,798,000. That funds programs like the United Family Medicine Residency Program, Teacher Shortage Loan Forgiveness Program, implements the Associate Degree Transfer Pathways and MnSCU, and implements the campus sexual assault policies. It also includes the school year, I got to get this right or Representative Erdahl will not like it, but it's his bill. It provides for a year-long student training pilot program. In addition, the University of Minnesota Crookston and the University of Minnesota Morris will receive appropriations. A couple of things that do not require appropriations. One would be the MnSCU and University of Minnesota College completion plan and the remedial education requirements for MnSCU. I'd like to, if you don't mind, go through in a little more detail a couple of these programs. We have the Teacher Shortage Loan Forgiveness Program. That's Representative Bennett's. I think I can explain that. Okay. This provides for teachers not only, I believe it, well, I'll back up here. It allows for teachers up to 5 years an opportunity to have some loan forgiveness, up to $1,000 each year. And it's for, I believe, for teachers that are new and also those who go back to get an additional license. Representative Heitzman has a bill dealing with the associate degree transfer pathways and MnSCU. It requires MnSCU to implement the new transfer pathways that were developed under the 2014 legislature. Representative Erdahl has the year-long student teaching pilot program. And Mr. Speaker, if I could ask Representative Erdahl to yield for just a moment to explain briefly how that works.
Representative Erdahl.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Nornes, just highlighting this provision a little bit. The greatest educational systems in the world train their teachers a little bit differently than we do, in that Finland and some of the others have a year-long student teaching program, where we here in Minnesota have 12 weeks. And in terms of training teachers and retaining teachers who come into the field better prepared, I think that this is a very good idea. And what my legislation in Representative Nornes' bill does is it establishes a pilot program through 1 or 2 MnSCU institutions for the purpose of offering an option. This does not eliminate the 12-week student teaching program, but it does provide for those for whom it would work a year-long option to have a student teaching program that would then be designed by our MnSCU pilot program.
Representative Nornes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank Representative Erdahl. Another provision within the higher education bill this year deals with campus sexual assault, and I think Representative Neal would like to further explain how that fits into our bill. Thank you.
The member from Wright, Representative O'Neill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. This is a great bipartisan effort, and I want to thank Representative Hillstrom for being my co-author. And there are many of you on that side of the aisle and my side of the aisle that have worked really hard on this. This is a collaborative effort amongst the U of M, the students of the U, MnSCU system, the private colleges, and even MnCASA, and especially MnCASA, the Minnesota Coalition Against Sexual Assault. This is creating a uniform policy across the state of Minnesota for all the post-secondary institutions, for both employees and students, to protect them, both prevent it and also after an assault has happened. It expands victim rights, it provides uniform amnesty, it provides a memorandum of understanding, and so that there is understanding as to if something happens, who is going to do what as far as law enforcement goes. It also creates an online reporting system, so we're modernizing our system so that those students who have smartphones can just go right on and report a sexual assault if they need to. We're also expanding the data collection a little bit beyond what the Clery Federal Act does. And like I mentioned before, it also provides comprehensive training, so we hopefully will prevent more than is happening now. I believe 1 in 5 women are sexually assaulted, and a little bit less than that of the men. It also provides a walk-in service if there's a student health service there. So it provides quite a bit of services and hopefully prevention as well.
Representative Nornes.
Thank you again, Mr. Speaker. And another provision in the bill this year, higher education, is dealing with college completion. And if Representative Norton would yield to that part of our discussion, please.
The member from Olmsted, Representative Norton.
Thank you very much, Representative Nornes, for letting me talk to this particular component of the bill. It's one of the components that's better in the House version than it is in the Senate. And this is dealing with college completion. We all know that we have students who are taking 4, 5, more than 4. They're taking 5, 6, or 7 years to graduate. It's very expensive, and it increases the debt that they have. And so I have a provision that I've worked with MnSCU. So there's a component for MnSCU and a separate component for the University of Minnesota to help students by asking each institution to develop a plan, and that plan is that it includes advising, increased advising, developing a plan for students who enter college that are undecided, and to find a better way to do that that's more appropriate and keeps them from wasting credits. Alternative math curriculum, opt-out scheduling, replacing developmental and remedial courses when appropriate with co-requisites, and I should talk about this. Some of you have received letters concerned about cuts to remedial, and this bill does not do that. It asks the university and MnSCU to look at alternatives for students when it's appropriate and bring back a plan in the future. So there are approximately 7 components for each institution. They are slightly different, but the whole concept is to get kids in and out of college so that they're able to be productive working adults with less debt. And so with that, I will ask your support of that section, and I think turn the floor back over to Representative Nornes.
Representative Nornes.
Again, thank you, Mr. Speaker. One of the provision we heard mention of remedial just a few minutes ago. Again, there's a portion of our bill dealing with that Representative Erdahl has introduced, and another very important part of this bill that helps students. And I guess we'll take a moment, Mr. Speaker, if we can ask Representative Erdahl to answer the question of what he is doing with remedial.
Representative Erdahl.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and Representative Nornes. 25% of our college students now are taking remedial courses, and 4 out of 10 who take these remedial courses in our community colleges never finish and get their degrees. This legislation prohibits MnSCU schools from requiring students to take a remedial course if they have received a college-ready ACT score in that subject area, saving students time and money.
Representative Nornes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Representative Erdahl. Unless I have missed something, I believe that pretty well covers the essential parts of this bill this year for higher education. Again, it's trying to help as many students as possible, and though it's probably not spending enough money that some would like, but it stays within the budget targets, and as we go to conference, I think we'll be having an interesting time when we get to the Senate and their bill. Mr. Speaker, if there are some questions, we could take that or go to amendments.
This is, members, the motion to insert the House language. The member from Hennepin, Representative Thiessen.
Thank you. I'd like a roll call, Mr. Speaker.
Roll call has been requested. Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call. Any further discussion on the motion to insert the House language? Seeing none, the clerk will take the roll on the motion. The clerk will close the roll. There being 68 ayes and 56 nays, the amendment is adopted. There is an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Murphy E. moves to amend Senate File Number 5 as amended, and the amendment is coded A18.
The member from Ramsey, Representative Murphy, to introduce your amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I have an amendment, the A11, that simply strengthens the language that's already in the bill to make sure that we are providing care to sexual assault victims on our campuses. And I'm wrong. I'm on the wrong amendment. Yep. How about that?
Yep, we're on the A18 amendment,
Thank you very
Representative
much,
Murphy.
Mr. Speaker.
Sorry about that.
And everybody else who just told me we're on the A18. Thank you. So, here we are. Thank you. Taking up the higher education bill. And, we're talking about the cost of, not only the cost of school for our state budget, but more importantly, we're talking about the cost of higher education for Minnesota students and their families. And it is expensive. I am a parent of 2 recent college graduates, and it is extremely expensive. And I don't know about you, but I'm certainly hearing a lot about student debt. And I am so happy about the work that we did 2 years ago when we passed the budget and we did a tuition freeze for all of our campuses. I think that was really important and something that I wish we were doing now. And obviously we're not because of the size of the tax cut proposal that we're going to hear later this week in Representative David's bill. There's only enough money in this budget to do a tuition freeze for the MnSCU schools and not for the University of Minnesota campuses. Which is, a real disappointment, I think a dirty shame for the kids of Minnesota, for the students, and for the University of Minnesota. I do think we are creating a little bit of a competitive disadvantage for the U by choosing one campus over choosing Minskew over the University of Minnesota. And I'm not quite sure why the Republicans are choosing to do that, but you are, because I think all of our campuses are really important. This amendment that I have does make one switch, and that is this. I think that there is a little bit of an earmark in this legislation dealing with the Crookston campus, and I'm sure as you read the paper like I did over the weekend, people are starting to catch on to the fact that the Republican majority is not really honoring their commitment to Greater Minnesota, you know, the commitment that you made that you're going to look out for them. And certainly by not freezing tuition in the University of Minnesota campuses, we are leaving out Crookston and Morris. And I'm sure that's a problem for the representatives from that area. And so this amendment proposes that we take $750,000 of that earmark from the Crookston campus, and instead we send it to the University of Minnesota at Mayo. And the reason why I think we should do this is because, you know, we've heard Representative Keel and others talking at great length about the tsunami of healthcare costs that we're going to experience with the Alzheimer's and what that's going to do to Minnesota, our aging population, our families all over across the state, and the cost to the state budget. And if we're serious about that, I think we should fund that. And so I am suggesting here with this amendment that it would be important to fund that Alzheimer's research and, you know, really take it from that earmark that I think Representative Keel and probably you know, others in the Republican caucus are putting in place to be able to shield her from criticism from her community. I'm going to withdraw this amendment, but I think that it is important for us to take note right now that the bill that we have before us, that Representative Nornes and others are supporting, really pits one set of campuses against the other and shortchanges, seriously shortchanges, the University of Minnesota campuses in Greater Minnesota. And you all promised on the Republican side of the aisle, you promised to look out for Greater Minnesota. And I don't think a little earmark for the Crookston campus is going to satisfy that commitment that you have made to the people of Minnesota, and I think they're on to you. I think that's really unfortunate. I think we should be doing a tuition freeze for all our students across the state of Minnesota. And with that, I will withdraw this amendment. Thank you.
Representative Murphy withdraws the A18 amendment. There's another amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Murphy E. moves to amend Senate File Number 5, the fifth engrossment, as amended, and the amendment is coded A11.
The author of the amendment, from Ramsey, Representative Murphy.
Thank you, another Mr. Speaker and members. This is language, as I was speaking to earlier, the A11 amendment is talking about including care for sexual assault victims on campuses. And I have, I hope, an amendment to that amendment, and I'm wondering if we could take up the A12 amendment, Mr. Speaker.
There is an amendment to the amendment. The clerk will... Should I give all these to you?
Oh, just one at a time.
Right, but they're all stacked together. The clerk will report the amendment to the amendment.
Hortman moves to amend the Murphy E. amendment to Senate File Number 5, the fifth engrossment as amendment. The amendment to the amendment is coded A15-0575.
Call upon the author of the amendment to the amendment from Hennepin, Representative Hortman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. My amendment is pretty simple. What it does is it freezes college tuition at the University of Minnesota and all Minskew campuses for the next 2 years. It increases the state grant. It increases the availability by making it available to more families than presently qualify. And it increases the average state grant by about $1,200. The state grant would reach about 30,000 additional students. The tuition freeze at the University of Minnesota would reach 54,000 students. The amendment also provides relief from student debt in two important ways. First, it funds the Office of Higher Education to buy high-rate student debt and reloan the money at lower interest rates. Secondly, it contains a tax credit authored by Representative Applebaum for anyone who's paying down student debt, a tax credit of up to $5,000. So members, in a time when we have a $1.9 billion surplus, we surely can afford to continue the tuition freeze that we had in place for the past 2 years, address the plague of student debt, and give some relief to Minnesota families. And Mr. Speaker, I'd like a roll call.
Roll call has been requested. Are there 15 hands? Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call. Discussion to the A15-0575 amendment.
Mr. Speaker.
Member from Wright, Representative O'Neill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to a point of order under House Rules 3.21, paragraph B, and I'm prepared to offer advice.
Representative O'Neill rises to a point of order under Rule 3.21, motions and propositions must be germane. Representative O'Neill, state your advice. Representative O'Neill, please state your advice. Sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Now we can hear you. My advice is the amendment to the amendment introduces a number of new subjects that are not contained within the underlying amendment, such as many of the things that Representative Hortman already explained, which was student loan credit, tuition freezes, several articles within, it deletes several things within Article 1, and this is actually an amendment to the sexual assault bill.
Advice for the Speaker. Member from Hennepin, Representative Hortman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. This is germane. The amendment is about sexual assault on campuses and higher education in Minnesota, and the amendment has to do with higher education in Minnesota, and so it is germane to the bill. The other thing I would add, Mr. Speaker, is on germaneness rulings on omnibus bills, we generally employ quite a bit of latitude because of the nature of the omnibus bill itself.
Any further advice? Members, I have studied the amendment, and I have studied the amendment to the amendment. I've reviewed the bill. After considering the advice of Representatives O'Neill and Hortman, I rule that the point of order is well taken.
Mr. Speaker,
Representative Hortman.
appeal the ruling of the Speaker and ask for a roll call.
Representative Hortman moves appeal the ruling of the Speaker and requests a roll call. Seeing 15 hands, there will be 15 hands. There will be a roll call. Representative Hortman, to your motion.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It could be a rookie mistake, but this is a higher education amendment dealing with a higher education amendment to a higher education bill. It is clearly germane.
The clerk, the member from Hennepin, Representative Thiessen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, members, I would also urge that we don't uphold the ruling of the Speaker. Members, we're sitting on a $2 billion budget surplus right now. $2 billion. And notwithstanding Representative Nornes's wringing of his hands, it was your decision to not put enough money into higher education to actually freeze tuitions. 2 years ago, we had a $627 million budget deficit, and yet we found a way somehow to freeze tuitions at MnSCU and at the University of Minnesota, to not distinguish and discriminate between the systems, and to actually do the right thing for Minnesota students after coming on the back of the biggest cut to higher education in the history of this state, which your party put in place in 2011. We're going back to the policies of 2011, where we're putting the burden, we're raising taxes, essentially, members, on families that have kids in higher education. Your tuition increases is exactly the same as a tax increase on those families. And it's a worse tax increase because it's a tax increase that takes away opportunity. So members, I would urge you to overrule the ruling of the Speaker. I would urge you to stand up for Minnesota students and their families, hard-working Minnesota students and their families who are just trying to get ahead, and let the Hortman Amendment go forward, because this is a plan that will actually create opportunity for Minnesota families, Minnesota college students, and let them proceed with the kind of productive and prosperous lives that we want for everybody. So this is your chance, members, to not take the skimpy bill that Representative Nornes has put in front of you and to actually make the kind of investments with a $2 billion budget surplus that we can make in Minnesota.
The question before the body is, shall the decision of the Speaker stand as the judgment of the House? A yes or green vote supports the ruling of the Speaker. A no or red vote goes against the ruling of the Speaker. The clerk will take the roll. Members, please vote. The clerk will close the roll. There being 69 ayes and 55 nays, it's a judgment of the House that the decision of the Speaker shall stand. There's an amendment to the amendment. The clerk will report the amendment to the amendment.
Bernardi moves to amend the Murphy E. Amendment to Senate File Number 5, the fifth engrossment as amended. The amendment to the amendment is coded A28.
Oh, that's right. Member from Anoka, Representative Bernardi.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This amendment helps our students who are taking rigorous coursework in high school as college-level credits. What's happening in our communities is when they're going to transfer these credits to college, they're not getting them accepted consistently. So what this bill does is make it transparent for students to know what the policy is and then to help them get transferred properly. Students that take college classes in high school are much more likely to graduate from college. And isn't that what we want? We want our students to be successful. So this bill, when students take International Baccalaureate Diploma classes, concurrent enrollment classes in the high school, and PSEO classes, they're going to have more confidence their classes are going to transfer correctly. I urge your vote. Thank you.
Discussion to the amendment. Member from Wright, Representative
Mr.
O'Neill.
Speaker, I rise to a point of order under House Rules 3.21, paragraph B, and I'm prepared to offer advice.
Representative O'Neill moves a point of order under House Rule 3.21. Motions and propositions must be germane. Representative O'Neill, please state your advice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. Again, this amendment to the amendment is introducing new subjects to the underlying amendment, which is the sexual assault bill and the care that a woman would be receiving once they go into a clinic. And the amendment to the amendment tries to offer information or a bill that Representative Bernardi had offered before in committee about transfer curriculum. So it's transfer curriculum being amended to a sexual assault bill.
Further advice for the Speaker. Seeing none and having reviewed the underlying content as well as the amendment to the amendment, the Speaker, the rule at the point of order is well taken. There's an amendment to the amendment at the desk. The clerk will report that amendment.
Murphy E. moves to amend her amendment to Senate File Number 5, the fifth engrossment as amended. And the amendment to the amendment is coded A12.
Member from Ramsey, Representative Murphy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And before I move the A12, I'd like to ask for a roll call on the underlying amendment, please.
The roll call has been requested on the A12 amendment. Representative Murphy?
Yes, Mr. Speaker.
Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call. Representative Murphy.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker and members. The A12 amendment simply provides emergency contraception for victims of sexual assault on campuses. And it is built on a 2007 law that provides victims of sexual assault emergency contraception in hospitals. We extend that provision,
We have one on the
that
A12.
model, to student services on our campuses to make sure that a woman who is sexually assaulted on campus has the access to and benefit of emergency contraception if that's what they choose. I'd ask for your support.
And Representative Murphy, just to be clear, were you asking for a roll call on the A11 amendment or the A12 amendment to the amendment?
Mr. Speaker, at this point, I'll ask for a roll call on the A12, and I will ask for a roll call later on the underlying amendment.
That was my understanding, so we already have a roll call on the A12 amendment. So discussion to the amendment to the amendment. Member from Hennepin, Representative Sarah S. Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to a point of order.
State your point of order, Representative Anderson.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to House Rule 4.03, Section 8H, an amendment to a bill is out of order if it would cause any type of the limits specified in the resolution to be exceeded. What Representative Murphy here is asking for would require additional dollars that are not part of the budget target for higher education, and I'm prepared to offer additional advice if you so choose.
Representative Anderson moves a point of order under House Rule 4.03, the Ways and Means Committee Budget Resolution, Effect on Expenditure and Revenue Bills. Advice for the Speaker. Member from Hennepin, Representative Thiessen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The budget resolution applies to our budgets here in the House of Representatives and the state budget going out to the colleges and universities. They can figure out how to spend the money to address this within each of the individual colleges and universities around the state. So this doesn't impact our bottom line state budget. All it is saying is that this is something that they need to provide as part of this program, which we are providing funding for, some funding for in the bill, but this would just allow each of those individual campuses to provide the funding as they can see fit. So it actually doesn't, the budget resolution doesn't even apply to this amendment, so I think you should find the point of order not well taken.
Further advice. A member from Olmsted, Representative Liebling.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And my advice would be that this is not out of order. It does not increase costs, because what the amendment is really doing is requiring the providing of information. As I understand it, the women would already have the ability and probably the right to ask for emergency contraception and have it be provided. So this isn't giving anybody anything new. All it's really doing is requiring that the information be given to women who have been the victim of a sexual assault, telling them that in fact they can have emergency contraception, which in fact they can have. It's not creating a new right, it's simply creating information, and that really should not cost anything new.
Members, further advice. Representative Anderson.
Advice, Mr. Speaker.
State your advice.
Mr. Speaker, there are several campuses that don't even provide any health services at all. They have no health student services facilities on campus. Obviously, that would be a burden to the state because they would have to provide funding for that. And so I would ask that you rule that this amendment is out of order.
Further advice. Representative Murphy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We have talked with both of you and with MnSCU. Most of the campuses do something like this already, though not all. If you look at the costs of emergency contraception, a dose of emergency contraception is between $30 and $60 per individual. We know that sexual assault is on the increase across the state of Minnesota on our campuses, and that's unfortunate.
Members, the noise in the chamber has become quite loud. Please take your conversations to the alcoves or to the retiring room. Representative Murphy.
I really appreciate that, Mr. Speaker, because this is a challenging issue for us. It is a challenging issue for us, and one that maybe we don't want to talk about, and I'm actually quite surprised that we are on a point of order on this, because the costs, of course, to the state's budget are negligible, and the cost to the campuses would also be negligible. But for the women who have been sexually assaulted, to not provide this kind of care is disastrous. And so I'm glad to finally have your attention. And I hope that we rule, I hope, Mr. Speaker, that you rule this point of order not well taken. I want to just talk a little bit about an article from 2014 that's talking about the reports of sexual assault on Minnesota campuses.
Point of parliamentary inquiry, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Anderson, state your parliamentary inquiry.
What order of business are we on right now?
Representative Anderson, we are on the Anderson point of order of Rule 4.03 on the A12 amendment to the amendment.
And Mr. Speaker, is this a point of offering advice or offering information on the amendment?
Parliamentary inquiry, Representative Anderson. This is offering. This is advice on the Rule 4.03, Representative Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Murphy, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and members, and Representative Anderson. Again, the amendment that I have before us is about emergency contraception, building on the work of Representative O'Neill and Representative Hillstrom on the section of this piece of legislation before us dealing with the care of victims after sexual assault on campus. And the amendment that I have simply says that we're going to provide female sexual assault victims with information about emergency contraception, and then if they choose, access to emergency contraception. And I'm sure you all understand how that works, right? That it is a medication that somebody takes after a sexual assault to prevent a pregnancy, to prevent the the meeting of the egg and the sperm. And it's super important for somebody when they've been sexually assaulted to have that as an option. So I don't think that this adds any cost to the state's budget, and a very negligible cost to our campuses. And I bet if they were before us right now, the people responsible for those campuses would say, yes, we should do this, we should take due care, and we can absorb that in our budgets. Because if there is a female student on our campus who is a victim of sexual assault, we should make sure we're offering them good information and access to the medication that they need in service of care after an assault.
Member from Washington, Representative Schoen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I know that I'm not the only person in this room that's looked in the eye of a victim of rape right after it's happened. This is ridiculous that we're standing at this point today negotiating almost zero sum. You know you've had family members, friends, maybe even your own daughter that's been a victim of rape. And if they're on that college campus, to not give them this access to this opportunity, how can we sit here and debate this as a point of order? Talk about cost, the emotional cost, the mental health cost, the cost of telling another human being, sorry, too bad. That's just not okay. That's not what we do here. We take care of people. We don't try to strike down and not take the tough votes. If you don't like it, vote no. But if you want to stand up for victims of sexual assault, be on the side of Representative Murphy.
Representative Thiessen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just a couple of things. On the point that there are some campuses that don't have student health service providers, that would mean that that argument would mean that Representative O'Neill's own provision is out of order, and I don't think you want to be saying that your own bill is out of order, because but the main point is in Representative O'Neill's language in the bill, it requires student health service providers to do this work. So if there's not one on campus, it wouldn't apply to them anyway. Representative Anderson and Mr. Speaker, I guess more appropriately. So I think Representative Anderson's argument about driving up costs at those campuses that may not have those providers is simply wrong, and if you rule that she's right, you're ruling the whole bill out of order. And secondly, just looking at the fiscal note, there's many items that MnSCU is saying that they are going to absorb. Even Representative O'Neill is actually not covering the costs of her own provision because the MnSCU is going to be covering those costs. So I think that there's really absolutely no way that you can find this point of order well taken, or you're going to be finding Representative Nornes's bill out of order. So I would urge, again, that you find the point of order not well taken, and let's just get to the vote on the bill, or on the amendment.
Further advice. Representative Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In the amendment, it refers to emergency contraception. When you look at statutes and the definition of emergency contraception, that includes IUD devices. That's a procedure. That would be a cost to the campuses, especially those that don't have health services. So I rule that you rule in favor of the point of order.
Mr. Speaker, advice?
Representative Thiessen.
Thank you. On that point, that would mean there's no way that any health service provider or any campus is going to know exactly what provisions they're going to have to provide in a particular year. You know, because in one particular year, students are going to get a lot sicker than they are in another year. So that point doesn't make any sense either. It's not going to drive up the cost of the state, certainly. It may drive up the cost to that particular provider in a particular year. But again, it's not fundamentally affecting the state budget. The point of order is not well taken.
Well, you don't get to make that ruling, Representative, so one moment. Your opinion is that their point of order should be that, correct? Member from Olmsted, Representative Liebling.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And one more point on this. I think that students, when they're going to college, carry insurance. They carry health insurance. And either they carry insurance through the college that they pay for through some kind of a fee, or I think in some cases they can opt out and carry their own insurance. But in either case, this kind of a cost would be paid for by the student's insurance. This is not something that would come out of the college budget, so I frankly don't see how this can carry a cost and be out of order for that reason. It certainly doesn't carry a state cost. So if you want to say that this is a state cost, I guess then any kind of health issue that a student might have is going to then be a state cost. And I don't think that Representative Nornes has budgeted for all the health care that a student might need on campus. I think that's generally carried under the student's insurance, either through the school or their private insurance, which, as we know, most people these days actually have insurance, thanks to the Affordable Care Act. So, Mr. Speaker, I would ask you to find the point of order not well taken.
Mr. Speaker.
Member from Ramsey, Representative Yaruso.
Advice, Mr. Speaker.
State your advice.
I've been increasingly frustrated listening to these objections on the basis of some vague notion that there might be an added cost. Anybody could stand up on any amendment and say, I think that's going to cost money. And without some sort of concrete information to back that up, some notion of what the estimated added cost might be, it's just a pure fabrication. It's someone's opinion. It's just, we used to, in my engineering classes, when someone would ask a professor where he'd gotten a number out of, well, occasionally if it was a number they had just estimated on the moment, they would say, I just did, and pulled it out of the thin air. And that's what we're hearing. Somebody who's just pulling an idea out of the thin air with nothing to back it up, nothing concrete. No estimate of how frequently this added cost might happen, no estimate of how much it might be, no estimate of whether or not these students have insurance. And every one of my kids and me, we had to sign things about having insurance when we went to college. Nothing to back it up, nothing factual whatsoever, except the desire to kill the amendment without a vote. We can't do that. It's not credible. This body has a responsibility to act on credible information, not on something somebody's going to pull out of somewhere. So, Mr. Speaker, I would advise you to rule the point not in order.
Members, having reviewed the amendment to the amendment, the underlying bill, paragraph H of House Rule 4.03, and on the advice of Representatives Anderson, Thiessen, Liebling, Murphy, Schoen, and Yaruso, I rule that the point of order is well taken.
Mr. Speaker,
Representative Murphy, what
I'd like
purpose do
to
you rise?
appeal the ruling of the Speaker, and I have advice.
Representative Murphy appeals the ruling of the Speaker. I assume you requested a roll call. Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call. Representative Murphy.
Well, thank you very much. I shouldn't be surprised anymore, 9 years into this Minnesota House of Representatives, that this would be the action of this Republican majority, that your misunderstanding of or fear about any intersection between emergency contraception and abortion, that lack of fundamental understanding of the science and what actually happens in a human body, would actually cause you to use a procedural motion and oppose emergency contraception for a sexual assault victim, for someone who's been raped. Your fear of this politics, your lack of understanding of how human reproduction works, about what emergency contraception is, and about the fact that someone might misunderstand outside of this building, your fear of that trumps your consideration of someone who's been raped and may be pregnant. It is unbelievable that you think the cost of this could impact the state budget in a way that it would blow your budget resolution. That's just baloney, bull hockey, as Representative Purcell likes to say. I cannot believe you would do this to women, to young women on campuses who've been raped. I can't believe you would do it. I don't know what's gotten into you people. Honest to God. In this bill, Representative O'Neill has done decent work talking about what we're going to do to take care of men and women who have been sexually assaulted on campus. And one of those things should be access to emergency contraception provided by a provider, a licensed provider on a college campus. And you say no, because you're afraid. And you're so afraid of those politics that you will put those women who have been harmed on the sacrificing platform of your politics. It's your choice. Oh, you have so many hard choices this session, but I can't believe you're going to make this one. That you will sacrifice women who have been raped for your so-called budget resolution after you've underfunded higher education because of your giant tax cut. I mean, seriously. Please, vote with me and overrule the unfortunate ruling of the Speaker. And look out for young women on our campuses. Even one we should look out for, to make sure that they get all the care that they need. And you've gone a little ways with Representative O'Neill, but you could come a little bit further and make sure they get all the care. Search your hearts and do what's right.
Members, the question before the body is, shall the decision of the Speaker stand as a judgment of the House? A reminder that a green or yes vote supports the ruling of the Speaker. A no or red vote goes against the ruling of the Speaker. Member from Hennepin, Representative Anderson.
Advice to the body, Mr. Speaker.
State your advice.
Members, on this provision that we have here, it is going to cost our campuses more dollars, the state more dollars, in order to enact this. And despite what Representative Murphy says, I have the same parts as her, and I pretty much know how it all works. So having said that, members, every single hospital in the state of Minnesota is required to provide care to rape victims. That includes this provision that she has. I'm curious that she didn't have the insight to provide this in the last 2 years that she was in charge of this place. But that being said, members, this does provide a cost. I encourage you to uphold the ruling of the Speaker.
The clerk will take the roll. Members, please vote. The clerk will close the roll.
Mr. Speaker.
Representative Earhart votes nay. There being 69 ayes and 56 nays, it is the judgment of the House that the decision of the Speaker shall stand. There is an amendment to the amendment. The clerk will. There's an amendment to the amendment. The clerk will report the amendment.
O'Neill moves to amend the Murphy E. amendment to Senate File Number 5, fifth engrossment as amended, and the amendment to the amendment is coded A30.
Call upon the member from Wright, Representative O'Neill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, I withdraw the amendment.
Representative O'Neill withdraws the amendment.
Mr. Speaker? Mr. Speaker, I'd like to offer the O'Neill amendment as an amendment to the amendment.
Representative Thiessen.
I'd like to reoffer the O'Neill amendment.
Representative Thiessen authors the A30 amendment.
Thiessen moves to amend the Murphy E. amendment to Senate File Number 5, the fifth engrossment as amended, and the amendment to the amendment is coded A30.
Representative Thiessen, to your amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think this is actually a really good clarification to the bill, and that we should adopt this language. So thank you, Representative O'Neill, for bringing it forward. I'd like a roll call.
A roll call has been requested. Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call. Representative O'Neill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I rise to a point of order 4.03.
Representative O'Neill rises to a point of order under Rule 4.03, Ways and Means Committee Budget Resolution Effect on Expenditure and Revenue Bills. Representative O'Neill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. As much as I would love to offer this, we haven't included this into the cost. And I do believe that STD testing, pregnancy testing, physical exam, a rape kit to preserve evidence would definitely cause a cost. These are things that, as far as I understand, are not currently available, and as much as I would like to have this, it does incur a cost.
Advice for the Speaker, members. Representative Thiessen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, I'm surprised that you would offer a point of order to your own amendment, Representative O'Neill. That seems very an interesting tactic, I guess. But, Mr. Speaker, you know, I would urge you again, I think you made a mistake the last time, I'd urge you to find that this point of order is not well taken. I think that they probably do a lot of these things at many campuses and already absorb the costs. And so I don't see why, when we're providing health services to people which we can't predict here on the House floor, the same arguments that applied last time, why this would drive up any more state budget costs. These are costs, as is evident from the fiscal note on Representative O'Neill's actual bill, that the campuses can absorb. So I would ask you to find this point of order not well taken.
Members, having reviewed the advice of Representative O'Neill and Representative Thiessen, I rule that the point of order is well taken. There are no further amendments at the desk. The clerk will give the bill its third reading.
Mr. Speaker.
Third reading, Senate File Number 5, as amended.
Representative Murphy's amendment is still at the desk, Mr. Speaker.
My apologies, members. I made a mistake. Obviously, we're not going to go to third reading when there's an amendment before us. Representative Murphy, to your underlying amendment. My apologies.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. First of all, I'd like a roll call on this amendment.
A roll call has been requested. Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call. Representative Murphy.
I really did think that we were going to have a coming together on a couple of ideas to further what is in the higher ed bill for women and men who are victims of sexual assault. I will say that I'm sorely disappointed about my my emergency contraception amendment, but I'm also wondering really the value of the legislation in the underlying bill if we're not able to do these things for victims, testing for sexually transmitted diseases, a pregnancy test, counseling, a physical exam, or a rape kit after a sexual assault. Those are the things we're leaving behind in Representative O'Neill's amendment that you ruled out of order. So I want you to vote for the A11, but we have a lot of work to do going forward. Thank you.
Discussion to the A11 amendment. Seeing none, the clerk will take the roll. Members, please vote. The clerk will close the roll. There being 122 yeas and 2 nays, the amendment is adopted. Now there are no amendments at the desk, and the clerk will give the bill its third reading.
Senate File Number 5, as amended, third reading.
Third reading.
Mr. Speaker, I move that this get re-referred to the Committee on Ways and Means.
Representative Thiessen moves that the bill, that Senate File 5 be referred to the Committee on Ways and Means. Representative Thiessen, to your motion.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, we just added the Murphy Amendment, which basically says that at these student health service providers have to now provide care to sexual assault victims. What we were trying to do with the amendments you ruled out of order because they apparently blew the budget target is to say that the type of care that is actually undefined but quite clearly in Representative Murphy's amendment is a cost that's going to blow your budget resolution. All we were trying to do actually in those two underlying amendments is define, those two amendments to the amendment is define what provide care to sexual assault victims is. It's going to cost more money now because we didn't even define it in the underlying language. So, Mr. Speaker, by your two previous rulings, and particularly the ruling on the O'Neill Amendment, you have already ruled that this bill now, with the Murphy Amendment, is out of order. It's breaking your budget resolution, and you need to send it back to Ways and Means to get it in accordance with the budget resolution. I'd ask for a roll call.
A roll call being requested. Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call. Discussion to the motion. Member from Hennepin, Representative Hortman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I think this is a good time that everyone can vote to send the bill back to Ways and Means for another reason as well, and that would be to make a minor adjustment in the budget targets and to take the money that's on the bottom line, take 1/20th of the money that's in your tax bill, and we could freeze tuition for every college student going to public college in the state of Minnesota. So members, let's send this back to Ways and Means where a few adjustments can be made. We can bring it back to the floor and do something good for the state.
Further discussion. Member from Stearns, Representative Knobloch.
Well, Mr. Speaker, members, I don't know that we need to see this in Ways and Means. It's fairly undefined in terms of what's actually been added. There isn't any specific definition of what care could be, and so I don't know that it specifically has an additional cost that we would have to have, the way it's written right now.
Member from Ramsey, Representative Yaruso.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. That was exactly the argument I was making moments ago when we were discussing whether or not the point of order was well taken. It's just mind-boggling that this is okay. That it's okay. One moment to make an objection based on a vague, unspecified, not even the loosest of estimates of costs, and rule an amendment out of order that could have helped the victims of rape. And now, when we raise this point, moments later, Representative Knobloch stands up and says, well, that's just vague. We shouldn't do that. The inconsistency, the hypocrisy is mind-blowing to me. That you would do that in public, televised for the whole world to see. It is one of the most hypocritical things I have ever witnessed in my life. That 2 minutes ago, there was some cost and we wouldn't be able to do rape kits, testing for STDs, counseling, and so on. Because of the cost. Oh my goodness, it'll cost something. We can't do that. It's not in the budget. And now when Representative Thiessen stands and makes that same point, now it's like, oh no, we're not worried about that. That's too vague. We're not worried about that. Don't worry about that. We won't send that back. Hypocritical beyond belief. So I urge you to vote green on Representative Thiessen's motion. Stop the hypocrisy. Stop making these motions based on nothing whatsoever. And let's get down to doing honest business for the people of Minnesota.
Member from Hennepin, Representative Thiessen. Member from Hennepin, Representative Pepin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I would ask you to vote against the re-referral. As Representative Chair Knobloch said, the underlying amendments that we voted on before had really specifically prescribed things that needed to be addressed. This does not have any of those requirements. Therefore, it does not need to come to Ways and Means.
Member from Olmsted, Representative Liebling.
Mr. Speaker, could Representative Pepin yield to a question?
She does not yield, Representative Liebling. Representative Liebling, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So the Majority Leader will not yield to answer question?
That's the direction I've been given. She said no. Representative Liebling.
All right. Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, I really just wanted to ask her what she thinks providing care to sexual assault victims would involve. Would Representative Knobloch yield to a question?
You will, Representative Liebling.
All right. Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Representative Knobloch, since we're talking about what this could possibly cost, and you thought it was too vague to really have any kind of cost here, I wonder if you could just explain to the body or answer the question about what you think could be involved, minimally. What would be involved in providing care to sexual assault victims?
The member from Sherburne, Representative Knobloch.
Well, Mr. Speaker, Representative Liebling, the way the amendment is written, it's pretty vague. I don't think it necessarily has a cost. It could be as simple as referring someone to a hospital, for example. But I guess as I look at it, Representative Liebling, there isn't anything specific in it that would show that there is a cost. At least a cost beyond what the... I don't see that there's anything specific that would have a cost.
Further discussion. The member from Olmsted, Representative Liebling.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Representative Knobloch. I mean, I just think that even though it isn't well defined here now, and it would have been better defined with the amendments to the amendment, I just think that if you're talking about providing care to sexual assault victims, I mean, that's got to mean something. And maybe in some cases, if you're in a place where there aren't any health services available, maybe it would mean a referral somewhere else. But we're talking about places, universities, where they have a student health service. And I would venture to guess that they probably see quite a few young women and possibly some young men who have been victims of sexual assault. And providing care to them has to mean something. So I stood and opposed one of the other points of order because I thought this was probably covered by people's health insurance. But apparently members of the majority party thought differently and thought that it created costs to do the sort of normal care of sexual assault victims, and so you all thought those things were out of order, and now apparently you think that those things are free. So it just seems really hypocritical to me, members, and I think that just in order to be consistent, we ought to vote here to send this bill back to Ways and Means, and then we can perhaps get some actual information instead of just speculating here on the House floor about what the possible cost of these provisions would be.
The member from Ramsey, Representative Murphy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and members, Representative Knobloch and others. When I think about my daughters, who are now 23 years old and just through college, they went to the University of Minnesota, and as I have done some work on this issue as well, and Representative O'Neill and I talked about that a little bit, providing care to a sexual assault victim is, for a responsible campus and for responsible adults that are on a campus, is much more than a referral to a hospital. Imagine, if you will, your child in a dorm who's been sexually assaulted, and what that would mean not only for your own child, but for other students that live in that dorm, and for an accused perpetrator. And what that means stepping back from the treatment post-assault to your campus, back to your dorm, back to your classes. Care for somebody who's been sexually assaulted on a campus could be as immediate as emergency contraception and as broad as counseling for the student, safety measures for the entire dorm. It could mean intervention against bullying for a wrongly accused attacker. It could mean academic counseling for a student who is so destroyed by the assault that she can no longer study, and she needs the help of a broad array of services that are not necessarily available on the campus because they haven't done that work. The amendment that you have agreed to, that you put on your bill, could mean all of those things. They are undefined. The amendments that you rejected define that and put some boundary around it. But the way it is in the bill now, it's so broad it could mean anything. I don't know what the University and MinSCU will think of that, but certainly they're going to incur costs. You should have thought of that before you rejected our amendments that defined it, but you didn't. And instead, you have broadly defined care. It's wide open, and it could mean so many things. And as I've talked with the campuses who are very interested in doing this work and doing it well, they are doing different things, and many of them are just on their way of beginning to understand what it really means to provide care after sexual assault. And face it, in Minnesota, we have a bit of a problem with sexual assault on campuses. I know you don't want to send this back to Ways and Means, but the way the bill is right now, I don't see how, based on the rulings that came before this, that you cannot. It busts your budget amendment, your budget resolution, far more than any of the amendments that we took up before. And so for the third time, I stand on the floor to say, I don't understand what you're doing and how you can continue to do the gymnastics that you're doing about your budget resolution and about this legislation. But anybody who's listening outside this chamber has got to be dismayed at the hypocritical treatment that you are now providing to women and young men who are victims of sexual assault on campus. Your disregard for that in support of your budget resolution is so disappointing, and they see it. I would ask that you vote to send it back to Ways and Means. You know, you can do it tomorrow. Send it back and put it up and get it back onto the floor. We've got time. We've got plenty of time. 3 weeks. We've got 3 weeks to do this. It's not that hard of a bill. You could easily do it. And by doing so, you'd be sticking up for young women and young men and making sure their campuses are safe and that they know that you care. So send it back. Send it back to Ways and Means.
There being no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll. Members, please vote. clerk will close the roll. There being 56 yeas and 68 nays, the motion does not prevail. Discussion to the bill. Member from Hennepin, Representative Hortman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I just want to express disappointment that we didn't add my amendment. You know, in the 2013-2014 biennium, we had a budget deficit of $627 million, and yet we funded a tuition freeze at all of the state colleges and universities and the University of Minnesota. I'm a proud graduate of the University of Minnesota, and it is a heartbeat of Minnesota's economy. There are 67,000 students at the University of Minnesota, and over 2/3 of them stay in the state of Minnesota after they graduate. The University of Minnesota partnered with Representative Pawlowski last year in the last 2 years, and they have tightened down administrative expenses. They attract more than $700 million in federal research funds, and they create a culture of innovation in our state. 69% of Minnesotans believe we are not funding the University of Minnesota enough. They're paying those tuition bills, and they know state support isn't what it should be. The House proposal is kind of the Hunger Games of education. You give a tiny bit of a tuition freeze to those students who are born on the 3rd Tuesday of the 4th month in a year that ends in 5. You don't give a tuition freeze to everybody. A tuition freeze for the University of Minnesota would save Minnesota families $65 million in the next 2 years. If you care about middle class and working families, one way to provide assistance to them is to freeze college tuition. If this House proposal were to become law, tuition at the University of Minnesota would increase between $2,100 and $2,600 in the next 4 years. That's a big burden to be putting on families in Minnesota. This proposal is so weak in its funding. It's $5 million below the 2001 appropriation for the University of Minnesota, and it's $80 million less than we provided in the year 2008. Members, this bill does not take care of the higher education institutions of this state in a fair manner. It does not help students control debt. It doesn't hold the line on tuition. And I hope that members will please vote no and send this bill back to committee for some more work.
The member from Clay, Representative Lean.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. This bill before us today, House File 845, Senate File 5, falls far short of what we can do and what we should do for all institutions of higher education in Minnesota. With a $1.87 billion surplus, there's absolutely no reason why we cannot continue a tuition freeze at all state schools, and there's absolutely no reason why we have to take money from the state grant program in order to provide a partial tuition freeze for some students. House File 845, Senate File 5 pits Minsky and the U of M against each other. This bill also, as I already said, takes money from families and from students who rely on the state grant program to attend school. Instead, we should leave this money in place, extend, or I should say increase individual awards to individual grant recipients, and also expand the prorated state grant funding for all part-time students, again, regardless of where they're going to school. Members, by 2020, 75% of all jobs in the state are going to require some form of higher education training. Let's build on the current success of our economy. Let's continue the tuition freeze that we put in place 2 years ago. Let's leave the state grant program intact. And most importantly, let's expand opportunity for all Minnesotans to enjoy prosperity and better themselves regardless of where they want to attain their higher education. Thank you.
The member from Nicollet, Representative Johnson C.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I'm going to agree with my colleague, Representative Lean from the Red River Valley, because I'm going to argue that the same holds true in southern Minnesota. And this bill really, in my mind, represents a set of missed opportunities. Specifically, I'd like to speak to one, which is a Veterans to Agriculture bill that I authored and had a number of co-authors, was heard in the Veterans Committee and in the Higher Education Committee, but it's not included in this bill. It is in the Senate bill. And the idea there is to take advantage of two situations, or to address two situations. One, we all know in this room that a lot of our veterans are having trouble finding employment, and have specific needs to develop the expertise to get employment. Secondly, those of us in rural Minnesota know full well that in many parts of the agricultural sector on the farm and those servicing the farm are having trouble finding people to fill the jobs that are needed. And the idea of the Vets to Ag bill was to bring those two together and use the Southern Minnesota Center for Agriculture at South Central College to develop a pilot program, which could then be replicated in the second year at other community colleges throughout the state. Addresses two needs, is not in the bill. But I also have a concern about the larger context, and generally there's a lot of missed opportunities. Fundamentally, there's insufficient funding for higher education. And again, at a time, as Representative Lean explained, we have a large budget surplus. The local Chamber of Commerce in my hometown is called Greater Mankato Growth. When I first came, my first encounter with Greater Mankato Growth a couple of years ago, after I was elected, they came to visit me to talk about the needs for the business community in Mankato. And it was very clear what their #1 priority was. It was talent. They said, this area needs talent. For us to continue to grow in the Mankato area, we need talent, fundamentally. And they talked about the value of education and about the value of higher education in developing that talent. They talked about the relationships that business in our area has with South Central College and with Minnesota State Mankato. And I think we could extend that in our region to the other community colleges and institutions throughout the region. And that talent is needed to develop the economy in that area. So along the Highway 14 corridor, yes, we need a 4-lane highway from Rochester to New Ulm. You've heard that before. But we also need the talent to fill those jobs, and the talented and skilled workers to continue the growth and take advantage of the opportunities built along that corridor to assure that we can continue to grow economically in greater Minnesota. Thank you.
Member from Ramsey, Representative Hausman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I have a question for the bill's author, if Representative Nornes would yield.
He will yield. Representative Hausman.
This is on page 12, lines 9 through 23, which is spending of a capital nature, and that is normally the kind of thing I think we would address in a bonding bill, and even more specifically, maybe under the HEAPR portion of the budget. I do have the University of Minnesota's HEAPR request, and there is a significant number of requests for University of Minnesota Morris, I think totaling 2.1 million. But when I see renovate classrooms and small group spaces, improve classroom acoustics and digital capabilities, and then specifically upgrade college athletics and recreation facilities, I'm wondering, how did this get here, and we don't normally, I think, address the capital issues in the higher ed funding bill, whether this went through a different filter. And the reason for concern is the University of Minnesota, as you know, has a process for getting requests from all of the campuses and then filtering them through a priority setting process and then coming forward with that, which hopefully Representative Torkelson will have a chance to look at some point before the end of the session. I wonder if you could comment on those lines.
The member from Otter Tail, Representative Nornes.
Mr. Speaker, thank you, and Representative Hausman. Representative Backer brought that those ideas anyway, to the committee, and you know, there's talk, pretty serious talk, that there will not be a bonding bill, and so to expedite. And again, we're talking about what students need. These classrooms need to be updated in order for the students and the faculty to use them. So we felt this is a way we could speed that process up and get the process. If we waited for the bonding bill, this would delay it for who knows how long.
Member from Hennepin, Representative from Ramsey, Representative Hausman.
And Mr. Speaker and members, I guess the concern I would have then, those of us who serve on capital investment, it sort of means one campus has gone to the head of the line. If there is no bonding bill, no one else has had this particular opportunity made available to them. So the urgency of this, particularly, for example, I guess I would use as an example of urgency, the veterinary isolation facility replacement, that laboratory. That, I would say, certainly is so urgent. What happens if we don't have a bonding bill and they don't get that isolation laboratory for research in avian flu? I would think that that might have been something more likely than that would have been funded here, just in case we didn't have a bonding bill. So at any rate, it just feels a little like one campus sort of went to the head of the line. And I would imagine that the university might have some other feeling about priorities for physical plant.
The member from St. Louis, Representative Schultz.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, I cannot support this bill because you not only forgot about the University of Minnesota, our land grant institution, you forgot about Greater Minnesota. So I'm really concerned, even though there's some token amount of money for Morris and Crookston, my constituents have sent me a lot of information about the University of Minnesota Duluth. And you all have members with some connection to the University of Minnesota in your districts, and they are not going to be happy. So what's happened with the University of Minnesota Duluth is that we've gone from having 36% of our revenue in state funds in 2009 to only having 21% of our revenue coming from state funds. So we're now very much tuition dependent. And without the tuition freeze, we're going to have to increase tuition and no longer be competitive with UWS, University of Wisconsin-Superior, and University of North Dakota. We're already not competitive because of our high tuition, because of state funding reductions. So we really need to help Greater Minnesota and the other campuses in our land grant system. The University of Minnesota Duluth is the second largest research university. We need to fund the mission, and we need to fund our students. You may have problems with administrators at the system, but what you're really doing is penalizing our students and our state's economy because of the impact the university has in its research and development and the multiplier effect. So I urge you to reconsider, look at all of the campuses, how the system is funded, and put money in for a tuition freeze. Thank you.
Member from Olmsted, Representative Norton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Many of the points that I would have made have been made by colleagues already. There's just a couple extras that I'm going to touch on. I'm going to try not to repeat here. But we have two wonderful institutions in this state with MnSCU and the University of Minnesota. And we are doing a disservice by not treating them equally in this funding. To only provide a tuition freeze for our two-year schools during the biennium, and perhaps MnSCU in the second year, which probably will mean an increase during that first year for our MnSCU four-year colleges, and certainly will mean an increase in the University of Minnesota to the tune of 2 or 3% per year for the students in order to just maintain the services that they have, is certainly worth not supporting the bill over. But I want to touch on one of the really fabulous things we have about the University of Minnesota, and that is it is our land grant research institution. This year, the University of Minnesota came to us with a request. It was a large request, and my eyes opened wide when I heard it, for $50 million in order to increase medical research. We aren't funding that at all in this bill. And perhaps $50 million was a big ask, but many of you know in the committees that you've served on that we have had requests. We have had requests from folks that are concerned with Alzheimer's and dementia. We have had research requests from spinal cord injury individuals and their families and the nonprofits. We haven't funded those, and one way we could assure that continued research happens in our institutions was at the very least to fund the university's request for medical research. We have failed to do that. So folks, tuition is going to go up at the University of Minnesota. It will likely go up at our four-year MnSCU institutions. All of our students deserve to be treated equally, and we have not done that. At a time of surplus, it is not the time to punish our students, their families, or pick winners and losers. It's completely unnecessary. So I would urge you, while this has some provisions of mine that I feel very proud about in it, and I'm grateful they're in there, I would urge you to vote no until we can come back with a funding level that's appropriate for all of our universities and colleges in Minnesota.
Member from Hennepin, Representative Carlson.
Mr. Speaker, members, I want to comment a bit about the cost of attendance. Tuition, by the way, is one important part of that. But when we're talking about the impact on students, when we don't adequately fund our higher education institutions and they have to turn to tuition, keep in mind that there are other cost factors that come into play as well. And I used to, when I served on that committee, periodically remind members that we really had to talk about the total cost of attendance. But what I wanted to point out, not too many years ago, and when I look around the room, many of us, probably the majority of us in here, when we attended one of our public universities or colleges in the state of Minnesota, we paid 1/3 of the cost of instruction. Then beginning in the 1990s, much of it under the leadership of the Republican caucus of the time, and through the years, we kept chipping away at higher education. And today's students pay double, literally double what most of us in this room, myself included, when I was attending one of our public universities in the state of Minnesota. So this has a real impact on students and families. When we read the coverage nationally and in the state of Minnesota about student debt and what that means for our economy, these kinds of decisions that we're making here today are what drives that. And I remember one of the chancellors of the state university system a number of years ago pointed out, when you talk about student debt, and that was actually at the beginning of the escalation, his name was Dr. Carruthers, pointed out that in addition to the one student's debt, very often you marry someone and your spouse has a student debt as well, and what the impact on the family is when they want to buy a home, start raising their children. I remember testimony a number of years ago about a man and woman that would be paying off their debts. They were both professionals when their children were starting college, because we're looking now, you got to keep in mind this is long term. But referring to the University of Minnesota in particular, keeping in mind, education, research, extension, I've never seen, even in our most difficult times, where we've treated one of our systems the way we have here. And by the way, completely ignoring Rochester, Minneapolis, St. Paul, Duluth, and the various research extension areas across the state of Minnesota that are in many of our communities. You can neglect research, and you have a top-ranked department that's doing cutting-edge research, and all of a sudden you lose those star professors that are drawing the public and private dollars into the state of Minnesota. So you have a very high-ranking department, a very high-ranking initiative activity, and all of a sudden you find out a few years
Representative
later
Carlson,
because you underfunded them.
Representative Carlson, hold on 1 second.
You've underfunded them that...
Hold on. Members, the noise in the chamber has become quite loud. Please take your conversations to the alcoves or to the retiring room so members can hear the debate. Representative Carlson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When you've underfunded that research, all of a sudden you discover that those research grants are at another university somewhere else, and you've lost your star researchers. And think about what that means for the economy for the state of Minnesota and the breakthroughs that might have taken place right here in our state when you're underfunding that research. So I'm going to be voting against this bill here today, and I don't take that lightly. I wish I was in a position where I could say, yes, we're doing good things for higher education in the state of Minnesota, but we truly are not. We're shifting the burden more and more onto the students and neglecting both our systems. Even though there is some money going into the MNSCU system, I would argue that that is grossly inadequate. And on top of that, what I would truly say is abusing the University of Minnesota and that tremendous asset that we have here in the state of Minnesota. This is just simply not the right direction to go. I'd appreciate everybody giving this a lot of thought and voting against this bill.
Member from Washington, Representative Schoen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would Representative Backer yield to a question?
He will. Representative Schoen.
Probably more than one here, but Representative Backer, it appears that you've managed to get about $1.4 million into this higher ed bill for Morris, and $400,000 just for the fields or athletic facilities or upgrades alone. And so I've been working on a few things. First off, is there any advice that you could give to the body for those of us that have been working on a lot of bonding projects here and there to, be able to get past the whole bonding committee and just get it into a bill?
The member from Traverse, Representative Backer.
Thank you, Speaker. Thank you, Representative. I had the opportunity to do a tour with Chancellor Johnson, and this is what they wanted to do to keep tuition lower at the University of Minnesota. And just like anybody else, wag my tongue, talk to people, and work real hard.
Member from Washington, Representative Schoen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Representative Backer, so, a good portion of this, if not all of it, would have been typically a bonding bill. And actually, you know what, I'm not going to ask you to yield to this, but I'm going to make this statement. And I find it sad that we were able to put in $1.4 million, which would probably be a bonding proposal, into the higher ed facility, but we fought tooth and nail to help victims of sexual assault. That's a sad day here.
Member from Hennepin, Representative Winkler.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Earlier in this debate, we had a conversation about fiscal notes and rape and what we do to care for victims. And I initially thought that that was a bit of a sidetrack from the underlying issues in the higher education bill related to tuition and debt and the kind of budget that we can provide in higher education. But on thinking about it a little bit more, I realized that was actually a perfect prelude to this discussion about the broader bill. And it underlines the extent to which you are a caucus living in denial. You are denying some basic facts and some basic fundamentals. The contraception debate was a perfect example. You deny that it costs anything to care for victims unless we actually care for victims in some specific way. You deny that that has a cost. You deny that a world-class education is available in this state anymore. You deny that it's necessary in this state, and you deny the students the funds needed to achieve a world-class education, and seem to believe that this is available for free or for cheap or for almost nothing. You deny that students can no longer pull themselves up through work and studying. They can't do it. You deny them that opportunity. You want to lower the wages that students count on to work their way through school. You want to increase the tuition that they're paying. You want to increase the debt that they're saddled in. You want to deny them the opportunity and the future and the hope that many of them believe is available through higher education. You deny them that. You deny the next generation a better future, and you do it through your misguided budget. I did some quick numbers in just comparing two little budget segments. You put $57 million into higher education. That's your budget target. Under the tax bill that we're going to be hearing on Wednesday, you provide a total of $171 million in tax relief to estates that have more than $2 million in assets. You provide $171 million. So that's almost 3 times the amount going into just the estate tax as you do for all students in Minnesota. The estate tax will benefit about 800 estates. So that's 800 people benefiting for $171 million versus the $57 million that would benefit 200,000 Minnesota students. So what does your budget look like? It looks like you think that 800 estates are 1,000 times more important than all the students in Minnesota. 1,000 times more important, each estate, than a student. That's the kind of misguided view of the state's economy, what the state's prosperity, the state's values that you bring to this debate. You deny the students a better future. One little snippet that's important to observe in this bill. So you're putting in $57 million new money towards higher education. In order to have a political talking point about some kind of tuition freeze, you've got to pull $50 million out of the state grant program in order to get up to the $100 million or so odd money that you're putting in to the campuses. In order to get that $50 million out of the state grant program, you need to define, your bill defines in statute how much students are allowed to live on every year for purposes of the state grant program. The definition that you have in this bill for student living expenses is below the federal poverty level. So you want students to live in poverty in order to take the $50 million out of the state grant program in order to create a tuition freeze for a few other students at the state colleges and universities in order for you to say that you continued the tuition freeze that we started 2 years ago. That's a denial of basic budgeting and basic economics for students. You are picking some winners, you are picking some losers, and you're doing it for political purposes. But you deny that it's about politics. Your whole session, your whole budget is built on denial. You think that it's possible to make promises about spending and keep them, to make promises about holding a budget in line and keep that, and make promises about cutting taxes, all at the same time. Closing out this session should be really easy. Any child, even one as challenged as little Johnny from Saturday with his $1, but even with a $1 education, any child should be able to figure out how to close out this legislative session when you have a $2 billion surplus at your back. That's not hard sailing, folks. That's a pretty easy job. And yet you've set yourselves up for a total failure. You've set yourselves up for failure in budget bill after budget bill after budget bill. Every one of these bills, you know, is loaded with poison pills. Mr. Speaker, yours, I think, was particularly notable in that regard. Loaded with poison pills, has zero chance of being signed into law, has almost zero chance of even starting a meaningful negotiation, and you only have 3 weeks to go. This is going to be you're creating a really hard situation for yourselves. Your leadership is going to have to convince the rest of you to completely cave in 3 weeks. You're going to have to sell out totally to the governor and to the Senate in order to get this session done on time. And today in the news of the Pioneer Press, it reported that this building is going to be shut down on May 19th. You're going to blow the budget on the Capitol restoration if you can't get done by the end of this session. So you're not even going to have a place to work. You are making this situation for yourselves. And given the record that you have in past years, the last 2 times Republicans held a majority in the Minnesota House of Representatives, they shut down state government. Now, granted, in both of those times, it was a deficit, so the issues were much more challenging. I don't think anybody thought it would be possible for Republicans to force a special session or possibly a state government shutdown with a $2 billion surplus, but if anybody can do it, it looks like you can, because you are racing as fast as you can toward that conclusion. Every one of these bills makes it less likely to be done on time. You are denying the basic state of reality. Governor Dayton won re-election with over a 100,000 vote majority. You won your majority with 2,600 votes. That is not exactly setting you up for a broad, sweeping mandate to completely undo the budgets, the priorities, the policies, and the values of Minnesota. We created an opportunity for all budget. You are creating a political opportunity for yourselves, you think, but unfortunately you're living in denial, because the denial is a sure and swift failure unless you figure out how to cave in totally to the rest of the Democratic Party in the next 3 weeks. It's going to be a challenge. This bill indicates just how far a challenge you're going to have to overcome. Members, I would urge you to vote no. It would be far more efficient for you to go back and reconsider this legislation, reconsider your budget targets, and start over than it would be to try to jam these things through on the Senate and the governor. This is a failure waiting to happen. You're denying that it's true. And members, in fact, and the last thing I just have to say, members, the majority leader denied a request to answer a question on the floor. If that's not a sign that the Republican majority is not ready to close out this session in an orderly fashion, on time with a balanced budget, I'm not sure what is. If you can't face the debate, if you can't stake the scrutiny on your bills and your rulings at the chair, I don't know how in the world you're going to stand up to Senator Bach and Governor Dayton.
The member from Polk, Representative Keel.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, the higher ed budget is an effort to lower student debt, get students career ready, and improve student safety on campus. I want to share with you the dollar figure that is projected to go to the Crookston campus and what the discussion has been with the chancellor in Crookston. A few years ago, they had decided to reduce the ag education curriculum, and they actually have the curriculum, but the major. And many students came there hoping that they could further that education. Well, they tried to connect it to the main campus, and it didn't work quite like they had planned, and so their plan is to begin to offer that education next year, and this will really help to get this ag education going. Many of our schools are looking for instructors in agricultural education, so it will fill a real need in rural Minnesota and also direct students into agriculture, which has quite a bit of job opportunity at a pretty successful rate. The other thing that the university is planning to do is to direct some to their health science programs, which will help rural students to work in a health science program and provide health occupations that are very needed in our rural areas in Minnesota. And so I'm really excited to see this help for this campus that, while small, is very successful in providing jobs in rural Minnesota. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Member from Wright, Representative McDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I sit on the committee, the Higher Ed Committee, so I just want to say some brief words regarding the bill and being able to learn and educate myself on the Higher Ed bill and Rep. Nornes' good work on it with his co-mate here, Representative O'Neill. There's no denying, Representative Winkler, there's no denying that this bill will increase our students, or excuse me, there's no denying that this will lower the student debt. There's no denying that our bill will better prepare students to be career ready. And there's no denying, without a fact, that this bill will increase and improve the safety and quality on our student campuses. There's no denying that this bill is the right bill. I support you. I encourage you to support it and vote for it for the improvement of our educational system. There's no deny the best vote for this bill is a green vote.
Member from Winona, Representative Pulowski.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's no news to anyone that we have a surplus. What should be news is that in this bill, we are about to increase a tax, an extremely regressive tax, a tax called tuition. Tuition became a tax during the recession when we borrowed and cut from higher education record amounts. Those record amounts added into the hundreds of millions of dollars. There were then record tuition increases that in some years were double digit. There was no consequence to this increase in this regressive tax, according to the University of Minnesota or MnSCU, until relatively recently, when the consequence of a tax increase, unabated, became record debt. We are now 4th and 5th in the nation in the amount of debt students carry and the number of students that have debt. But we have a surplus. In 2013, over Easter break, Governor Arne Carlson called me. He was a little upset with what was going on with the administration at the University of Minnesota, with its cost and with its excessiveness. He was also upset with what was going on in MnSCU. He told me that when he was governor, the governor's salary was approximately the same salary as the University of Minnesota president. Well, the governor hasn't gotten a raise since Arne Carlson, but the University of Minnesota president is now $800,000. The chancellor of the MnSCU system is $380,000. These salary increases came about at a time when there was record cuts to higher education, record debt, record tuition increases. There have been discussions on this floor about the salaries of commissioners, and we're worried about the salaries of commissioners. They're pikers compared to the administrators in higher education. Almost any higher education MnSCU president gets twice and sometimes 3 times what a commissioner makes. Plus, over the Great Recession, they received a bonus for making startlingly good decisions like, we can raise tuition and there's no consequence except record debt. We had in the 2013 bill oversight and accountability of higher education. Representative Davids called the 2013 higher education bill accountability on steroids. Well, if that bill had accountability on steroids, this bill's anemic. We still have problems in higher education. We have problems with tuition, we have problems with debt, and we have problems with administration. And none of those issues are properly addressed in this bill. We have a surplus. Tuition is going to go up. We can argue that it isn't going to go up for everyone, but it's going to go up for all of the University of Minnesota and the 4-year campuses of the MnSCU system. Some people have said that having a freeze on tuition is a Band-Aid, We gave higher education a gaping wound during the Great Recession. This is no Band-Aid. We're trying to repair an almost fatal blow to higher education. In 2013, the House stood alone. We were the only body that said we were going to freeze tuition. The governor didn't have it in his budget, the Senate did not. And yet by the end of the 2013 session, the governor signed into law the first and only tuition freeze this state has ever seen. Then the House stood alone. In 2015, MnSCU had tuition freeze as the core of its budget proposal. The University of Minnesota had tuition freeze as the core of its budget proposal. The governor had tuition freeze as the core of its budget proposal. Today, we shouldn't be increasing a regressive tax like tuition. We should be repairing the wound that was delivered to higher education over the Great Recession. We should be telling the parents and the students that they've had enough. That if you get a degree in the state of Minnesota, you don't have to mortgage your life for the next 10 to 20 years. That you might be able to have a family, you might be able to buy a house, and that you can return to Minnesota the gifts that were given to you in the higher education systems of this state. We have a surplus. This is not the bill that should be passed when we have a surplus.
Member from Hennepin, Representative Thiessen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, I think Representative Plowski just hit the nail on the head. Members, we're missing a huge opportunity here. We have hardworking Minnesota students all over the state of Minnesota who are pursuing their dream, their career. They're pursuing the future of this state. And yet we're saddling them with $30,000 in debt. You know, when a family, that average family that you all like to talk about so much, when they have a little bit of extra money, like we have right now, they're going to invest in their kids and their future. You're making a different choice. And I have to come back to it again, because over and over again on the education bill, Representative Wills got up and said, God, please let us take the Senate position. When Representative Lewin was defending her bill, she said, oh, please, let's go to where the governor and the Senate are. Because you know that they actually have a better position. But you are prostrating yourself at the altar of owners of skyscrapers, the owner of the Mall of America, the owner of Walmart. That's who you are delivering for instead of the hardworking college students and their families in this state. And it's shameful and it's embarrassing. You should vote against this bill. And this is the thing, we gave you the chance over and over again to actually grab that power from the Speaker, to take that power away from Representative Pepin and Representative Knobloch, where you could actually stand up and say, we don't agree with these budget targets. We don't agree what you're doing to students in this state, to college students in this state, And you rejected that over and over. We actually gave you the chance to vote on that, and you voted no. So what I really hope today is that college students and their families across this state are watching. Because what you are doing, rejecting voting against Representative Murphy's amendment to actually help victims of sexual assault and rape in order for some fake budget argument that you then later reversed yourself on. I hope college students and their families are watching to see what you're doing in a time of surplus to add to the burden that they have to actually advance themselves in this state. We had a $627 million budget deficit, a several billion school shift that you left with us in 2013, and yet we found a way under Representative Plowski's leadership to actually freeze tuition at all of our campuses for 2 years. You have a $2 billion budget surplus, and you can't even manage a tuition freeze at any of the systems. I mean, that's ridiculous. Let's vote no on this bill. Let's put the people of Minnesota first. Let's put our college students first. And let's make sure let's move forward together on a budget that's really going to work. Because, you know, the fact of the matter is, we do only have 3 weeks to go. And what I'm seeing now, the way you're setting up all these budget bills, Representative Winkler is exactly right. What we're going to see in the next 3 weeks, and what we've heard from members on your side of the aisle of these bills have come through the committees, and their concern over the fundamental lack of funding in these bills, is that you are going to rush to embrace the Senate. You're going to grab onto their targets immediately, and you're essentially going to pass the bill that the Senate are passing right now. This is all a false exercise right now, members. So let's just vote no. Let's start over again. Send it back to Ways and Means. Let's change the targets. Let's come back with the Senate's bill. That's why we offered to just take the Senate bill's language. You rejected that, but that's where you're going to end up. So members, vote no on the bill.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Pepin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. Well, we've heard some interesting discussion today about all of our failures, that your believed failures on our side. But I just want to point a few things out to everyone and what we got under all Democrat leadership the last couple of years from the last biennium. We got $2 billion of increased taxes. We got a whole bunch of union payback legislation, including forcing small businesses to unionize. We got the $137 million Senate office building that apparently, I guess the reason we have that is because of your need to pass the minimum wage last year, and I understand that. That's fine. You have to do what you have to do to please your union bosses. But despite that, we have put great budget bills together, and this is an example of one of the great pieces of legislation we put together this year. And I want to thank Chair Nornes for his work on this, as well as Vice Chair O'Neill on her work on this. And we can feel good about this. The bill does 3 important things that I think we can all feel proud of. It lowers student debt, it gets students career ready, and it does improve student safety on campus. It lowers student debt by giving a tuition freeze for MnSCU. It allows students to avoid remedial courses if they received a college-ready score on ACT in the subject area. It gets students career ready, including allocating funding for the agriculture education so we can continue to have productive farmers in Minnesota, helping to put food on the market, helping once again, another thing that we've done to help rural Minnesota. It also requires colleges to develop a comprehensive plan that encourages and facilitate students to complete degrees, diplomas, or certificates in their field of study on time, and it improves student safety on campus. You can complain a lot about what we didn't do in this, but I will point out the hard work that Representative O'Neill in particular has worked on this for many months, and it's strong legislation that protects our kids on college campuses, creates an online reporting process. It provides for comprehensive training for campus security officers, campus administrators, and others involved in responding to sexual assault. It connects campuses with local law enforcement so that they can work collaboratively on this problem. And it's a lot more than that was done in the last 2 years on the same issue. Members, again, thank you, Representative Nornes, Representative O'Neill. This bill lowers student debt, gets students career ready, and improves student safety on campus. And I would ask for a green vote.
The member from Otter Tail, Representative Nornes.
Thank you, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Majority Leader Pepin, and everyone that has chimed into the discussion today regarding higher education and what I consider to be a bill worth a green vote. We talk about tuition as being an automatic thing. It sounds like you go to school and that's what you earn as a big debt. I had two students that came to see me who were both going to private colleges. They were a group, actually, and I asked the group, how many of you are going to be graduating without debt? I said that without debt. I expected no one to raise their hand. Two in the group decided to raise their hand because they will graduate without debt. That takes a lot of hard work and determination, but the debt we're talking about is not necessarily automatic. So I just point that out, that there are ways to do that, and I know we have some of the regents here watching tonight from the University of Minnesota. I want to address them that we are behind you as a university. We want to do as much as we can for you, and at the same time, I ask the regents to do as much for their students as they can. And if there's a tuition increase, make it as minimal as possible, because I think that's doable too. But we try to do as much for as many students as possible. And just between the university and MnSCU, and the number may not be exactly perfect, but it's about 463,000 students right now that we're dealing with. That's a lot of students, not counting the for-profits and the privates. And Minnesota is very lucky to have a lot of choices for students and a lot of opportunities for them, regardless of where they choose to go to school. And our state grant program is very important as a part of that, because it takes and allows money to go with the student and not to the specific campus. I just wanted to point that out. Again, I thank you for the discussion tonight. I believe that this bill is good going into conference with the Senate, and I look forward to that opportunity. I also look forward to your green vote this afternoon.
Seeing no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll on the bill. The clerk will close the roll. There being 72 ayes and 55 nays, the bill is passed as amended in its title agreed to. Reports from the Committee on Rules and Legislative Administration.
Pepin for the Committee on Rules and Legislative Administration, pursuant to Rules 1.21 and 3.33, designates the following bills to be placed on the calendar for the day for Wednesday, April 29, 2015, and establishes a pre-filing requirement for amendments offered to the following bills: House File Number 845 and Senate File Number 2101.
Motions and resolutions. There are copies of the non-controversial motions at the House desk and online. If there's no objection, we'll take action on these motions first. Hearing no objection, the motions prevail. Announcements. The member from Candy, Ojai, Representative Baker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members of the House. I wanted to, if I could, give you a very brief update as to the severe situation we're having right now around the state of Minnesota regarding the avian flu situation with our turkey flocks. I've had the pages send out a map that just should be distributed to you. As of this morning, at 10:30 this morning, we had 4 more farms that were infected, which puts our total of lost turkey birds and chickens over 3,100,000 lost birds. Today alone, we added 5 more farms to the list, and adding Chippewa County for the first time for their farms that were affected in their county. So 55 total farms have been infected and shut down. 16 barns are actually still waiting for the foam teams to show up because we don't have enough water support and enough personnel to go in and take care of the barns. However, I want to say thank you to our governor who declared a state of emergency. Also, he's employed the National Guard to hit the streets, and they arrived in Wilmer today at 8 a.m. this morning with water support trucks and everything else. I also want to say I'm grateful for Chair Hamilton for working through the financial numbers that are coming in fast and furious so that we can address this concern to our state. And just lastly, ladies and gentlemen, remember this turkey is safe. I ask you to support the turkey industry, buy turkey, have turkey sandwiches here as much as you can, but this is a serious situation, and we are over 33,100,000 birds today, and that number is changing every few hours. So I appreciate your thoughts and your support on this as we move forward. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Further announcements. The member from Sherburne, Representative Knobloch.
Mr. Speaker, members of the House, the Ways and Means Committee will meet at 8:30 a.m. tomorrow, room 200, to take up the agriculture finance bill.
Any further announcements? Representative Pepin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I move that when the House adjourns today, it adjourns until 10 a.m. on Tuesday, April 28th, 2015.
Representative Pepin moves that when the House adjourns today, it adjourns until 10 o'clock a.m., Tuesday, April 28th, 2015. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. The motion prevails. Representative Thiessen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just to get clarification for tomorrow, so we're coming in at 10 a.m. and then I think breaking for recess for caucus until 1 p.m. or so. Is that correct, Representative Pepin, if she would yield for a question?
She will yield. Representative Pepin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and Representative Thiessen. We will come into session at 10. We'll recess for rules and for caucus, and then we will come back around 1.
Representative Pepin.
I move that the House do now adjourn.
Representative Pepin moves that the House do now adjourn. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. The motion prevails, and the House stands adjourned until 10 o'clock a.m., Tuesday, April 28th, 2015.